Will you be my mom, Valentine?
Yes, sweetheart, I would love to.
Little girl's Valentine miracle fulfills hope as she begged a billionaire to be her mother's Valentine. The flat in Surelier was small, but it was a palace of dreams. Its walls, painted a fading cream, were not decorated with expensive art, but with maps of their future. Kimmy had pinned a colorful calendar to the kitchen wall, its squares filled not with appointments, but with hopeful, penciled-in goals. Save for Tun's business license. Look at Flat in Yaba. Start side hustle. Cakes? Tund, in turn, had taped a meticulously drawn floor plan to the side of the old, humming refrigerator. A sketch of a 3-bedroom house he'd designed himself, complete with a small garden for children to play. Their love was not the frantic, dramatic kind often sung about in Afrobeat songs. It was quieter, steadier, built in the daily rhythm of their shared life. It was in the way Tund would wake up an hour earlier than his job at the printing press required, just to make sure he had time to walk Kimmy to the bus stop for her teaching assistant job at the primary school. It was in the way Kimmy would save the meat from her own lunchtime jollof rice, wrapping it carefully in a small piece of foil to add to his dinner. Their evenings were their sanctuary. After the day heat had softened into a gentle Lagos twilight, they would sit on their small balcony, 2 plastic chairs pulled close together, overlooking the bustling, noisy street below. The air would be thick with the scent of frying akara from the vendor downstairs and the distant, rhythmic pounding of fufu from a neighbor's kitchen. It was there, amidst the symphony of everyday survival, that they built their empire of plans. See, Tund would say, his finger tracing the lines on his floor plan, his voice a low, confident hum. This room here, at the back, gets the morning sun. That will be your study. For your catering business headquarters. You will have a big desk here and a shelf for all your recipe books. Kimmy would smile, resting her head on his shoulder. And what of this small corner near the kitchen? She'd ask, playing along. That, he'd say, his eyes sparkling, is for the tasting area, where your clients will sit and eat small chops and swear they have tasted heaven. They will beg you to cater their events. They dreamed in practical, achievable steps. Their shared notebook, its cover stained with a ring from a cup of tea, was their most treasured possession. On its pages, their lives were broken down into columns and lists. Page 1, Immediate Goals. It listed things like fix leaking tap in bathroom, buy a standing fan before hot season, and save in 5,000 monthly for emergency fund. Page 2 was 5-year vision. Here, the writing was neater, the dreams bolder. Tund's own business registered, move to a 2-bedroom flat, get a reliable used car. And then, on the last page, simply titled One Day, were the grand, shimmering dreams. Build our house in my father's village, travel to Ghana for holiday, have 2 children, a boy and a girl. They were not just planning a wedding, they were architecting a life. Marriage was the inevitable crown, but they wanted the foundation to be unshakable first. Tund, the son of a retired schoolteacher, had seen too many marriages buckle under the weight of how. He was determined that for Kimmy, his Ada, his first and only love, the answer to how, would already be settled before he ever knelt with a ring. I want to give you ease, Kimmy, he'd tell her on those balcony evenings, his hand enveloping hers. Not just love. Love we have plenty. I want to give you a life where you don't have to count kobo at the end of the month, where you can chase your own dreams without fear. Let me build that platform for us first. Kimmy would squeeze his hand, her heart full. She believed in him utterly. His ambition was not a restless, selfish thing. It was a protective, generative force that included her in every calculation. Their love was their headquarters, and from it, they were launching their separate and joint campaigns into the world. They were a team, a small, tight-knit company of 2, investing every emotional and physical naira into the shared venture of us. The flat in Surelier, with its peeling paint and noisy neighbors, was not just where they lived. It was the workshop where their future was being patiently, lovingly assembled, piece by careful piece, long before fate would decide to test the strength of their construction. The unexpected blueprint. The first sign was a profound, bone-deep tiredness that sleep could not touch. Kimmy began dozing off during the quiet reading period at the school library, her head nodding over the pages of Things Fall Apart. Then came the sudden, violent aversion to the smell of the diesel generator exhaust that perpetually hung around their street, a scent she lived with for years. One morning, the sight of the vibrant red palm oil Tund was using to make his famous survival eggs sent her rushing to the bathroom. She kept it to herself for 2 weeks, a secret hum buzzing beneath the daily rhythms of their plans. She tracked dates in the margin of their shared notebook, her heart hammering against her ribs. The possibility was both thrilling and terrifying, a wild, unbidden line drawn across their careful, penciled-in blueprints. Finally, on a Saturday morning washed in harsh sunlight, she bought a test from a discreet pharmacy 3 streets over. She waited until Tund had left to meet a potential client for his side hustle printing jobs. In the silent flat, the only sound was the drip of the faulty tap and the frantic beating of her own heart as she watched the 2 bold lines appear, unambiguous and life-altering. When Tund returned, he found her sitting on the edge of their bed, the plastic stick on the nightstand between them like a sacred, frightening artifact. The notebook was open on her lap, to the one-day page. "Tund," she said, her voice strangely calm. "We have to revise the plans." He followed her gaze to the test, and his body went very still. The air left the room. For a long moment, he simply stared, his mind, always so quick with calculations and solutions, utterly blank. The client meeting, the new printer he was saving for, the quiet pride in their orderly progress, all of it receded into a distant hum. Here, in the present, was a fact, a new, living variable. He didn't whoop with joy or sweep her into a dramatic embrace. This was not that kind of moment. This was seismic. He slowly sat beside her, the mattress dipping under his weight. He picked up the test, turning it over in his large, work-roughened hands as if it were a fragile piece of a new, complex machinery he needed to understand. "Are you sure?" he finally asked, his voice a low rasp. 3 tests sure," she whispered, the bravado leaving her. A tear escaped, tracing a path down her cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness, but of sheer, overwhelming magnitude. Tund looked from her face to the open notebook. His eyes traced the words "have 2 children, a boy and a girl." It was there, on the list, a dream for the distant, settled future. But dreams, he realized with a jolt, did not follow timelines. They arrived on their own schedule, bold and demanding. A storm of emotions crossed his face: shock, fear, a dizzying spike of primal pride, and then, settling over it all like the still eye of a hurricane, a deep, protective worry. He thought of his bank account. He thought of the one-room inn parlor they lived in. He thought of the relentless, grinding cost of life in Lagos, hospital bills, school fees, diapers, the constant, hungry mouth of responsibility. I haven't gotten the kind of money I need," he said, the words wrenched from him, full of anguish. It was the confession of a man who measured his worth by his ability to provide. "Not to raise a family. Not the way I want to. Not the way you deserve." He saw the flicker of fear in her eyes then, and it pierced him more sharply than any failure ever could. He took both her hands in his, gripping them tightly, as if he could transfer his resolve through their intertwined fingers. He looked directly at her, his gaze intense, unwavering. "But listen to me, Kemi. Listen," he implored. "This is our child. Our child. The money, the plans, we will figure it out. I will move mountains. I will work until my hands break. I will print day and night. I will learn to bake cakes with you. Whatever it takes." His voice grew thicker, infused with a ferocious promise. "Keep it. Please. Keep our baby. We will meet this. Together." He was not asking. He was vowing. In that moment, he revised the entire blueprint of their future in his mind. The 3-bedroom house sketch on the fridge would have to wait. The used car was postponed. The 5-year vision page was now obsolete. A new, urgent, and more important project had just been commissioned: survival, provision, family. He pulled her into his arms, and she buried her face in his neck, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs of relief and fear and awe. They clung to each other in their small, sunlit room, the careful architecture of their old plans crumbling around them. In its place, born of sheer will and love, was the first rough sketch of a new, more daring, and irrevocable design. They were no longer just planning a life. They were building a harbor for a soul they hadn't met, and the construction started now, with nothing but their 2 beating hearts and a promise as solid as stone. The good luck charm. The next 7 months were a season of furious, loving preparation. The flat in Surelier transformed from a workshop of dreams into a command center for an imminent, joyful invasion. Tun's floor plan of a future house was carefully taken down from the fridge, replaced by a brightly colored chart tracking Kimmy's pregnancy, week by week, adorned with her own little doodles of fruits and vegetables to signify the baby's size. The emergency fund envelope, once reserved for a fan or a tap repair, was now boldly relabeled baby in Tun's firm block letters. Every extra naira was funneled into it with a religious fervor. Tun became a man possessed by a double-edged drive. By day, he worked his salaried job at the printing press with a new, steely focus, volunteering for extra shifts. By night and on weekends, his side hustle exploded. He printed wedding invitations, church programs, business flyers, and small-run posters. He networked with anyone who would listen, his pitch now infused with a palpable urgency. "I need to work, sir. My wife is carrying my child," he would say, and something in his earnestness made people want to give him a chance. Kimmy, meanwhile, navigated the physical upheaval with a determined grace. Morning sickness gave way to a voracious appetite. She began experimenting in their small kitchen, her catering headquarters, dream taking a practical, immediate turn. She perfected her moin moin, wrapping it in delicate, airtight leaves. Her small chops, spring rolls, puff puff, samosas, became legendary among their friends. She started taking small orders, the income from which went straight into the baby envelope. They were a tandem engine, pushing forward, fueled by love and a mild, constant panic. Then, on a humid night throbbing with the sound of crickets and distant generators, Ifioma arrived. Her first cry was not a whimper, but a strong, declarative wail that sliced through the clinical air of the hospital ward. When the nurse placed the swaddled bundle in Kimmy's exhausted arms, and Tund peered over, his face wet with tears he didn't bother to wipe. The world seemed to hold its breath, and then click into a new, perfect alignment. They brought her home to Surelier, and it was as if the universe itself leaned in to bless their audacity. A week after Ifioma's birth, Tund received a call. A medium-sized bakery, impressed by the quality of his last job, wanted a full rebrand, new logos, packaging, menus. It was the biggest single contract he had ever landed. The payment cleared the debt they'd accrued from the hospital bills and left a surplus that made them giddy. For Kimmy, a mother from the school where she worked, having tasted her small chops at a naming ceremony, commissioned her to cater a full 50-person birthday party. The success of that event led to another, and then another. Ifioma's kitchen, their friends started calling it jokingly. The grandmothers arrived, turning by turn, bringing with them the ancient, stabilizing wisdom of the village. Tund's mother, Mama Tund, came first, filling the flat with the pungent, comforting smell of ugwa soup and singing old Igbo lullabies that seemed to instantly calm the baby. She taught Tund how to properly support Kimmy, not just with money, but with shared night watches and cups of tea. When she left, Kimmy's mother, Mama Kimmy, swept in with her Yoruba proverbs and energetic efficiency, taking over the market runs and launching a thorough, loving critique of Kimmy's swaddling technique. Ifioma thrived, a serene, observant baby with wide, curious eyes. And as she grew, so did their fortunes. Tund's business, now officially registered as Apex Print Solutions, moved from a corner of their living room to a small, proper shop front in a better part of Surelier. Kimmy's catering list grew so long she had to start a waiting list. One evening, as they sat on their balcony, now crowded with a baby's drying cloths, Tund held a sleeping Ifioma against his chest. He looked at Kimmy, who was tallying up the week's orders, a soft smile on her face. The street below was just as noisy, the air just as thick, but everything had changed. "Do you see?" he whispered, awestruck. "She did this. She is our good luck charm." Kimmy looked up at their daughter, her heart swelling. It wasn't magic, not really. It was as if Ifioma's very existence had sharpened their focus, amplified their courage, and announced to the world that this family was a serious venture worth investing in. The baby had not brought luck. She had ignited a latent power within them. She was the living, breathing reason for every risk they now took, and the world, it seemed, was responding to the ferocity of their love for her. In her quiet baby sleep, Ifioma had woven herself into the foundation of their lives, not as a burden that strained the blueprint, but as the cornerstone that made the entire structure not just possible, but unshakably strong. The secret plot. The success that followed Ifeoma's birth had a texture to it. It was solid, measurable, filling their home with a hum of contentment rather than just noise. By the time Ifeoma blew out 4 candles on her dodo-shaped cake in December, their lives had been beautifully rewritten. They had moved from the Suralier flat to a cozy, proper 2-bedroom apartment in a quieter part of Yaba. The walls were freshly painted, and on one of them hung Tun's old, carefully preserved floor plan of a 3-bedroom house, now framed, a testament to a dream in progress. A used, but reliable, Honda sat outside. Yet, for Tund, a quiet hunger stirred. They had security, they had comfort, they had a vibrant, joyful daughter. But he looked at Kemi, the woman who had believed in scribbled plans and a leaking tap flat, and he felt the weight of a specific, unfulfilled promise. He had given her stability. Now, he wanted to give her ceremony. He wanted to crown their practical, hard-won love with a public, sacred vow. He wanted to write the final, beautiful chapter of the story that had begun on that old balcony. The idea came to him fully formed, like a divine download, a week after Ifeoma's birthday party. Valentine's Day. It was perfect. It was the day for lovers, and what greater love story was there than theirs? He would not just give her flowers. He would give her the future they'd dreamed of, wrapped in the present they'd built. The plotting became his most cherished secret. He was a general preparing for a benevolent coup. At his print shop, under the guise of working on a client's luxury wedding invitations, he designed his own. He chose the paper himself, a thick, creamy stock with a subtle watermark. The wording was simple, elegant. Together with our families, we invite you to witness the union of. He left the date blank, his heart pounding with excitement as he hid the proofs in a locked drawer. Next came the ring. He didn't go to a fancy mall in Victoria Island. Instead, he sought out an elderly goldsmith in Balagan Market, a man whose hands were a map of decades of crafting love tokens. Tund described what he wanted, something timeless, strong, but with a delicate beauty. He brought a small, rough emerald, a stone his own father had given his mother, now passed to him. The old man nodded, understanding the assignment. "We will set your past into her future," the goldsmith said, and Tund knew he had come to the right place. The venue was the final piece. He chose the restaurant not for its trendy fame, but for its significance. It was where, 2 years prior, broke but hopeful, they had celebrated his first major print contract. They had shared a single plate of peppered snail and fantasized about a life like the one they were now living. He booked the same corner table. He enlisted the only accomplice he needed, Ifeoma. One evening, as he bathed her, surrounded by a fleet of rubber ducks, he spoke in a low, conspiratorial tone. "Ife, my little general, I need your help for a surprise for Mummy." Ifeoma, who at 4 understood the importance of surprises, nodded solemnly, soap bubbles catching in her curls. "On Valentine's Day, at the restaurant, I will give Mummy a very special present. When I stand up and take her hand, I want you to take this." He produced a small, velvet box from his pocket. "And bring it to me. Can you be my brave messenger?" Ifeoma's eyes went wide at the box. She reached out a wet, careful hand and poked it. "Is it a ring?" she whispered, having absorbed the concept from the animated princess film she loved. Tund laughed, a sound of pure joy. "It is the ring, my smart girl. The most important one. Our secret." She mimed, zipping her lips and throwing away the key, a gesture she'd learned from her grandmother. The conspiracy was sealed. In the days leading up to the 14th, Tund moved through the world with a secret light in his eyes. He hugged Kemi a little longer in the mornings. He looked at her as she marked her catering orders, at the focused furrow in her brow, at the gentle curve of her smile, and he felt a love so vast it was almost painful. He was going to make her incandescent. He was going to recreate, in a single, planned moment, the spontaneous joy of their daughter's birth. He was going to propose a new, official beginning, built upon the rock of everything they had already survived and celebrated. The secret plot was more than a romantic gesture. It was an act of profound gratitude and a vow for the future, all wrapped in a velvet box entrusted to a 4-year-old messenger. The stage was set, the players were ready, and Tund counted down the hours, his heart a drum beating the rhythm of a long-awaited yes. The incandescent yes. The afternoon of February 14th draped itself over Lagos in a warm, honeyed light. In their Yaba apartment, Kimmy moved with the pleasant, unburdened rhythm of a woman content. She dressed Ifeoma in a beautiful, new attire dress, its indigo patterns swirling like dark water against the crisp white fabric. It was a matching set. Kimmy's own gown, in the same material, was an elegant, flowing cut that made her feel lovely. She assumed it was just a sweet family tradition, a Valentine's dinner, a chance to dress up, to celebrate their love in the simple way they now could. "Daddy is taking his girls out," Tund had said, his voice holding a casualness that was just a fraction too perfect. Kimmy, suspecting nothing more than perhaps a special dessert or a small gift, had simply smiled and kissed his cheek. Tund himself was a symphony of controlled nerves. He dressed with meticulous care, his hands slightly unsteady as he fastened his cufflinks, a recent gift from Kimmy. In his pocket, the velvet box was a comforting, terrifying weight. He watched his two ladies, his heart so full he thought it might simply stop from the sheer pressure of his happiness. Ifeoma, clutching a small, beaded purse, gave him a wide-eyed, solemn nod. The mission was alive. The restaurant was as he remembered, yet transformed by memory and significance. Soft, live high-life music drifted from a corner, and the air smelled of curry leaves and grilled fish. They were led to the corner table, the very one. Kimmy smiled, a flash of recognition in her eyes. "Our table," she murmured, touched by the sentiment. The meal was a slow, delicious unfolding. Tund was uncharacteristically quiet, listening more than speaking, drinking in Kimmy's laughter, the way she helped Ifeoma cut her chicken, the gentle sheen of the candlelight on her skin. He was memorizing the before picture, knowing the after would be etched in his soul forever. Ifeoma, for her part, played her role with the gravity of a star in an epic drama. She ate carefully, her eyes darting between her parents, waiting for her cue. She patted her little purse where the ring box now resided, a secret agent on high alert. As the plates were cleared and a refreshed plate of coconut candy arrived for Ifeoma, the music shifted. The band began a soft, instrumental rendition of Alaluf, one of their songs from university days. Kimmy hummed along, a soft, nostalgic smile on her lips. This was Tund's signal. He took a deep, steadying breath that did nothing to calm the storm in his chest. He stood up. Kimmy looked up at him, curious, a question in her beautiful eyes. "Kimmy," he began, and his voice, to his own ears, sounded strange, thick, resonant, cutting through the gentle din of the restaurant. He walked around the table to stand beside her chair. Around them, conversations began to hush, sensing a shift in the atmosphere. He knelt. A soft, collective gasp rippled through the nearby tables. Kimmy's hand flew to her mouth. Her eyes, wide and disbelieving, shimmered with instantly pooled tears. "From the first day in that small flat," Tund said, his gaze locked on hers, his voice gaining strength. "You have been my partner, my planner, the mother of my greatest treasure." He glanced at Ifeoma, who was now standing perfectly still, her mission face on. "You believed in my scribbled blueprints when I had nothing but hope to offer you. You built a life with me, brick by brick, jollof rice by jollof rice." A tear escaped and traced a path down Kimmy's cheek. She was trembling. "You have been my girlfriend, my strength, my sanctuary. Today, I don't just ask you to be my Valentine." He paused, the world narrowing to her face. "I ask you to be my wife. To let me love you officially, before God and everyone, for all the days of my life." He held out his hand, open and waiting. This was Ifeoma's moment. As rehearsed, she sprung into action, a tiny, determined figure. She marched forward, opened her beaded purse, and with immense ceremony, placed the velvet box into her father's waiting palm. The entire restaurant seemed to let out a collective, melted awe. Tund opened the box. The emerald, set in delicate gold filigree, caught the candlelight and exploded in a shower of green fire. It was breathtaking. For a second, Kimmy was utterly still, suspended in a bubble of shock and overwhelming emotion. Then, the dam broke. A sob of pure, unfiltered joy burst from her, and she began nodding, her head moving in frantic, beautiful agreement before she could even form the word. "Yes," she cried out, the word cracking with emotion. "Yes, Tund. 1,000 times yes." He slid the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit. As he rose, she rose with him, throwing her arms around his neck, laughing and crying into his shoulder. The restaurant erupted in applause, cheers, and the joyful ululation of a nearby auntie who had been watching the entire scene with rapt attention. But no one watched with more profound understanding than Ifioma. She saw it. She saw the light. It started in her mother's eyes, a spark that ignited into a blaze, then seemed to radiate outward from her very skin. The tears on her cheeks weren't of sadness, but of liquid sunlight. Her smile wasn't just a smile, it was a sunrise. In that moment, her mother wasn't just happy, she was incandescent. She was transformed from the warm, loving woman who made Moin Moin into a being of pure, shining joy. Ifioma stored that image away in the deepest part of her heart. The sight of her mother, glowing like a perfected star, held aloft in her father's arms, the green stone glittering on her hand, became her definition of happiness. It was a picture of a promise kept, a dream realized, a love so powerful it could change the very air around it. The yes was not just an answer to a question. It was the final, glorious piece of their foundation locking into place, and it shone with a light the little girl would desperately try to remember, and one day would fight with all her soul to reignite. The colorful union. The months that followed the incandescent yes were a whirlwind of joyful, purposeful chaos. The shared notebook, which had seen them through pregnancy and business plans, now found a new section, the wedding. Its pages bloomed with color swatches, guest lists that grew and were painstakingly trimmed, sketches of Asoebi designs, and menus that were debated with the gravity of a peace treaty. Kemi's mother, Mama Kemi, took charge with the gusto of a field marshal. She arrived from Ibadan with a bag full of lace samples and a mind full of tradition. The Igbiawo must be proper, she declared, spreading out the lace on their living room floor. Tun's mother, Mama Tund, was the calm counterpoint, focusing on the spiritual heart of the union, consulting with the priest, and ensuring the ceremonial colonnuts and palm wine were of the finest quality. Tund and Kemi were the joyful conductors of this symphony of planning. They wanted a day that reflected them, a celebration of their journey, not just a performance of pomp. Their asoebi was not the usual stiff lace, but a beautiful, modern attire in deep indigo and cream, a tribute to the fabric of their proposal night. The pattern, they told their guests, symbolized the deep waters they had navigated and the clarity they had found. Ifioma was at the center of it all, a tiny, excited satellite orbiting the happy planet of her parents. She was to be the chief bridesmaid, of course. Her dress was a miniature, puff-sleeved version of her mother's, and her fitting sessions were events of immense seriousness, punctuated by demands for more sparkles. She practiced walking down the aisle with a pillow minus the real rings, in their living room for hours, her face a mask of solemn importance. The wedding day dawned bright and clear, as if Lagos itself had polished its sky for the occasion. The ceremony was held at St. Dominic's, a modest but beautiful church that had witnessed their quiet Sunday prayers for years. When the music swelled and the doors opened, Kemi appeared on the arm of her beaming uncle. She was a vision, not in a frothy, imported gown, but in the elegant, flowing attire that hugged her form and spoke of rooted elegance. The emerald on her finger winked in the sun streaming through the stained glass. But it was Tun's face that stole the breath of the congregation. As he watched his bride walk toward him, the man who built empires from printer's ink and sheer wool was utterly, beautifully undone. Tears tracked freely down his cheeks, his smile so wide it seemed to light the pews. Ifioma, preceding her mother in her little dress, carefully scattering petals, looked back and saw her father crying. For a moment, she paused, worried, until she saw the light in his eyes, the same incandescent joy she'd seen in her mother's. It was a matching set. The reception was held in a brightly decorated hall in Yaba, bursting with music, color, and the aroma of a feast that was Kemi's ultimate triumph. Her catering business, now officially Ifioma's Kitchen, provided the food, and it was a masterpiece, a testament to how far they'd come from the single plate of peppered snail. There were mountains of jollof rice, smoky suya stations, baskets of flaky meat pies, and the legendary Moin Moin that had started it all. The highlight was not the first dance, but the family dance. As King Sunny Ade's guitar rippled through the hall, Tund, Kimmy, and Ifeoma took to the floor. Tund held Kimmy close, their foreheads touching, swaying. Then he bent down and scooped a giggling Ifeoma up, settling her between them. They danced as a unit of three, a closed circle of pure, completed joy. The crowd cheered, clapping in rhythm. In that moment, surrounded by the vibrant noise of their community, they were not just husband and wife, they were a kingdom. As the party wound down and the stars came out, they stood together under a canopy of fairy lights, sticky with cake and happiness. Ifeoma was asleep in her grandmother's lap, exhausted from dancing. Kimmy leaned her head on Tund's shoulder, the emerald a cool, comforting weight on her finger. "We did it, Ada?" Tund whispered, pressing a kiss to her hair. "Every single plan." Kimmy looked around at the remnants of their celebration, the colorful fabrics, the smiling, tired faces of their families, the sleeping form of their daughter. "No," she said softly, her heart full to bursting. "This is better than any plan. This is real." The colorful union was more than a wedding. It was a vibrant, noisy, beautiful declaration. It was the final stitch in the fabric of the life they had woven together from dreams, hard work, and a little girl's lucky charm. They were no longer builders laying a foundation. They were now the inhabitants of a home they had built with their own hands and hearts, ready to live out the happily ever after they had earned, page by careful, joyful page. The silent killer. For 4 months, the apartment in Yaba was a sanctuary of newfound peace. The wedding confetti had long been swept away, but a settled, golden light seemed to have taken up permanent residence within its walls. The framed floor plan on the wall was no longer just a dream. It was a blueprint they were actively saving towards, its edges now softened by the reality of their shared joy. Tund's print shop buzzed with more orders than he could sometimes handle, and Kimmy's catering calendar was booked solid for the next quarter. Ifeoma had started nursery school, returning each afternoon with paintings of 3 stick-figure people under a giant, smiling sun. Tund, in particular, moved with a lightness that was new. The weight of "not yet" had been lifted from his shoulders. He was a husband, a provider, a man who had kept his promises. He hummed as he ironed his shirts in the mornings, kissed Kimmy with a proprietorial sweetness that made her blush, and swung Ifeoma onto his shoulders for airplane rides around the living room with a frequency that suggested he, too, couldn't get enough of the sheer normalcy of their happiness. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon. Kimmy was in the kitchen, testing a new recipe for coconut cookies, the air sweet and warm. Ifeoma was at the table, diligently coloring in her people with a purple crayon. The phone rang, and Kimmy wiped her hands on her apron, smiling, expecting it to be another booking. The voice on the other end was not a client's. It was strained, formal, belonging to Tund's young assistant, Emika. "Auntie Kimmy, it's Uncle Tund." There was a pause filled with a terrible, hollow static. Kimmy's smile faded. "Emika, what is it? Has there been an accident at the shop?" After the cake was eaten, a new kind of restlessness took root in Ifeoma. She was 6 now, bigger. The memory of her father's face, the sound of his laugh, was beginning to soften at the edges, becoming more like a story she remembered than a person she knew. This terrified her. But the memory of the light on her mother's face, that remained sharp, vivid, a perfect, glowing diamond in the fog of the past. It was her most precious possession. One afternoon, as Mama Tund was gently massaging Kimmy's motionless hands with shea butter, she sighed, a sound heavy with a year's worth of grief. "She has left us, this one. Her body is here, but her spirit has gone to be with Tund." Ifeoma, coloring on the floor, looked up sharply. "No, Grandma," she said, her voice firmer than it had been in months. "She's not with Daddy. She's just sleeping, in a very dark room inside." Mama Tund gave her a sad, pitying smile. "Oh, my child. But Daddy knows how to wake her up," Ifeoma continued, putting down her crayon. She climbed onto the chair by the bed, her mission face settling into place. He knew the secret. "What secret, NWAM?" Mama Tund asked, humoring her. "He made her shine," Ifeoma stated, as if explaining a fundamental law of the universe. "On Valentine's Day, at the restaurant, he asked her the question and gave her the ring, and she woke up so bright, like a star." She turned to her grandmother, her eyes wide and earnest. "We need to make her shine again. Then she will wake up for real." Mama Tund's eyes filled with fresh tears, not just of grief now, but of a heartbreaking tenderness for the child's unshakable logic. She pulled Iphioma into a hug. "Oh, my little prophet." From that day, Iphioma's vigil became proactive. Her stories to her mother shifted from reminiscences to blueprints. "Soon, Mummy," she would whisper, brushing her mother's hair. "Soon it will be Valentine's Day again. We will have flowers and music, and someone will come and ask you, and you will be bright again, and then you can open your eyes." She started to plan with the meticulousness she had inherited from her father. She asked Mama Kemi for flowers, not just the usual single bloom, but Valentine flowers, the red and pink kind. She began to listen intently to the sounds of the hospital corridor, her ears attuned not for doctors, but for the possibility of music. In her mind, she began to assemble the components of the spell: the scent of flowers, the sound of joy, the presence of a Valentine. Her faith was absolute. The doctors with their charts and the grandparents with their weary prayers were working in the dark. But Iphioma knew. She had seen the formula for joy with her own eyes. It was not complicated. It was love, presented on bended knee, on a specific day, wrapped in promise. As January bled into February, a quiet, fierce determination solidified within her 6-year-old heart. The adults were waiting for a medical miracle. Iphioma was planning a miracle of memory, a reenactment of perfect joy. She was the only one who held the script to wake the sleeping queen, and she would stage the production, with or without a cast. Her mother had retreated from the pain of loss. Iphioma would lure her back with the echo of her greatest happiness. This was no longer just a hope, it was the mission, and its launch date was February 14th. The scent of memory. February in Lagos was a month of sun-bleached skies and burgeoning heat. In the hospital, the air conditioning fought a perpetual, whirring battle against the warmth that pressed at the windows. For Iphioma, the entire month was a single, long-held breath. She counted the days on the small calendar Mama Kemi had pinned to the wall, her finger tracing each square until it landed on the 14th, which she had circled over and over with a red crayon until the paper nearly tore. On the morning of Valentine's Day, a change seemed to hum in the sterile air. Mama Kemi, hoping to coax a spark of normalcy into the grim room, arrived with a small, precious gift, a bouquet of pink roses for her granddaughter. "For my strong, strong girl," she said, her voice thick. "Today is for love, and nobody loves more than you." Iphioma accepted the flowers with solemn grace. They were soft and velvety, their delicate scent a tiny rebellion against the antiseptic blankness of the room. They were perfect. They were a prop in the play she was directing in her mind. She needed one more thing, the right person. But who could that be? The doctors were busy. The kind nurse was a woman. Her grandfathers were too sad, their shoulders permanently stooped. Feeling a strange pull, a need to be somewhere the world was still moving, Iphioma asked to sit in the main hospital reception for a little while. Mama Kemi, exhausted from another sleepless night in the chair, nodded. "Don't wander, Omomi. Just sit and look at your flowers." The reception was a river of human anxiety, a cacophony of low conversations, ringing phones, and hurried footsteps. Iphioma found a plastic chair in a slightly quieter corner. She clutched the roses to her chest, their petals cool against her skin. Closing her eyes, she did what she had done every day for a year. She prayed. But today, the prayer was specific, a direct dispatch to God and anyone else who might be listening. "God, please," she whispered into the bouquet, her face buried in the blooms. "Today is Valentine. Mummy loves Valentine. She needs someone to be hers. Someone to make her shine again, like Daddy did. Please, let her wake up. Send the Valentine." She poured her entire 6-year-old soul into the plea, her small shoulders trembling with the intensity of her faith. As she prayed, the hospital smells, alcohol, floor polish, sweat, swirled around her. And then, it happened. A new scent cut through the miasma, clear and distinct as a note from a familiar song. It was spicy, woody, with a hint of sweet smoke, oud and sandalwood. It was the scent of his chest when he carried her to bed. It was the scent on his collar when he kissed her goodbye. It was her father's perfume. Iphioma's head snapped up, her prayer shattered by a seismic jolt of recognition. Her heart, a dormant bird in her chest, beat a frantic, wild tattoo against her ribs. "Daddy?" Her eyes, wide and desperate, scanned the busy hallway. And there he was, a tall, broad-shouldered man in an impeccably tailored dark suit, walking with the assured, purposeful stride of a man who owned his surroundings. He was speaking quietly into a phone, his profile sharp. For a glorious, heart-stopping second, the world rewound. The hospital melted away. It was her father, coming home from work, coming to find them. Daddy? The name was a breath, a hope so acute it was pain. But as he turned slightly, the illusion fractured. The line of his jaw was different. His hair was cut closer. This was not her father. This was a stranger. Yet, he wore her father's scent like a second skin. The man, Chinedu Okonkwo, had come to visit his younger brother, who was recovering from a routine surgery on a private ward. His mind was on board meetings and logistical problems, a world away from the small girl in the plastic chair. As he passed her, a blur of expensive fabric and imposing presence, Ifeoma acted without thought. The roses, the prayer, the scent, they coalesced into a single, undeniable command. This was the one. God had sent him. He smelled right. She slipped off the chair. The flowers, her sacred offering, were already in her hands. Her little feet, in their worn sandals, carried her across the polished floor. She didn't run. She approached with the gravity of a priestess fulfilling a prophecy. Just as he was about to pass, she reached out. Her small hand, clutching the stems of the pink roses, touched the fine wool of his trousers. The river of memory had delivered a scent. The scent had delivered a man. And now, Ifeoma was ready to deliver her request. The impossible mission had found its unlikely candidate, guided by the ghost of a perfume and the unwavering heart of a child. The proposition. The tug on his trousers was slight, almost imperceptible amidst the hospital's bustle. Chinedu Okonkwo, concluding his call with a firm, "Send the figures to my assistant," glanced down, a mild flicker of interruption crossing his features. He expected a dropped paper, perhaps a stray cord. He slumped on at his desk. "We called the ambulance straight away, but..." Emika's voice broke into a choked sob. They said he was gone before they even reached the hospital. The world did not go dark. It did something worse. It became hyper-real, yet utterly meaningless. The smell of coconut turned cloying and sickly. The purple of Ifeoma's crayon seemed violently bright. Kemi heard a sound, a thin, high, animal whine, and realized it was coming from her own throat. The phone slid from her nerveless fingers and clattered onto the tiled floor, the plastic casing cracking like a bone. Ifeoma looked up, her big eyes wide with confusion at the noise. "Mummy." Kemi did not hear her. She was staring at the cracked phone on the floor, at the flour dusting her apron, at the framed floor plan on the wall. Gone. The word meant nothing and everything. It was an impossibility. Tun was at work. He had kissed her goodbye just that morning, his lips tasting of tea and promise. He was at work. Her legs gave way. She did not faint gracefully. She crumpled, like a building whose central pillar had been vaporized. Her knees hit the hard floor, but she felt no pain. A great, soundless pressure was building inside her skull, a scream too vast to escape. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her vision tunneled to the shattered phone, then to the concerned, blurry face of her daughter swimming into view. "Ife." She tried to whisper, but the word was ash. Then the pressure found its path. It wasn't a scream, but a silent, seismic rupture of the soul. A darkness, not from outside, but from the very core of her being, surged up and swallowed her whole. Her eyes rolled back, and she pitched forward, collapsing into a heap on the kitchen floor, the world and its unbearable news receding into a blessed, silent nothing. Ifeoma sat frozen, her purple crayon held aloft. She stared at her mother, who was so still. She looked at the broken phone. A slow, cold understanding, far beyond her 4 years, began to seep into her. Something was very, very wrong. Daddy was not coming home. And now, Mummy would not wake up. She slid off her chair and walked to her mother's side. She patted Kemi's cheek, as she had seen her do when Ifeoma pretended to be asleep. "Mummy, wake up." There was no response. Only the terrible, unfamiliar silence of the apartment, which had, just minutes before, been full of the scent of cookies and the certainty of love. The sanctuary was now a tomb, and the little girl stood alone at its center, the silent killer having stolen not just a life, but the light from 2 others. The retreat into silence. The sterile, antiseptic world of the private hospital room in Acadia became Ifeoma's new universe. Its sounds were not the laughter and high-life music of her home, but the monotonous, electronic beep-beep-beep of the machine tracking her mother's heartbeat and the soft squeak of nurses' shoes on linoleum. Its smells were of bleach and loneliness, overlaying the faint, fading scent of her mother's coconut oil. Kimmy lay in the narrow bed, a beautiful sculpture carved from wax. Her chest rose and fell with the gentle assistance of machinery, but her spirit was far away. The doctors, with their kind, tired eyes, used words like catatonic state and psychogenic coma. Her body was whole, they explained. It was her mind that had retreated, seeking shelter from a shock too devastating to withstand. Ifeoma refused to leave. In the first blurry, chaotic hours after the ambulance had taken them both away, she had clung to her mother's gurney with a ferocity that allowed for no separation. So, a cot was brought into the room. Her grandparents arrived in a storm of grief, Mama Kimmy wailing, her body shaking with sobs, Mama Tund, stoic, but with eyes red raw, and they took shifts. But the constant, the anchor in that still room, was the little girl. She became the keeper of the vigil. She arranged her few toys on the windowsill. A stuffed bunny Tund had won at a carnival, a plastic teacup from her play set. She would pull her small chair right up to the bed, climb onto it, and take her mother's limp, cool hand in both of her small, warm ones. "Mummy," she would whisper, her voice a tiny bell in the quiet. "Today at the hospital shop, Grandma bought me chin-chin. I saved some for you." She would place a piece on the bedside table. The nurse with the kind voice gave me a green crayon. "I drew you a picture. It's our house, and the sun is yellow. Daddy is there, too." She would hold up the drawing, leaning it against the water pitcher. She told stories. She recounted their old balcony evenings, mixing up the details but holding onto the feeling. "Remember when Daddy printed the bad flyers with the mistake, and we laughed until our tummy hurt?" She talked about the wedding, about the feel of her puff sleeves, about the sweet taste of the wedding cake. She sang the lullabies her grandmothers sang, her voice thin and tuneless but earnest. Her grandparents' grief was loud, a tempest of tears and prayers and anguished conversations in hushed tones about funeral arrangements, about bills, about the cruel senselessness of it all. A young, strong man felled by something as silent as high blood pressure. Ifeoma's grief was different. It was a deep, quiet excavation. She was searching for a key. She replayed the memories like a sacred film strip, pausing always on the brightest moments. And the brightest, the one that glowed with an almost supernatural light, was the image of her mother at the restaurant, transformed by joy, saying yes. That memory became her compass. The doctors and grandparents spoke of medicines and neurological responses. Ifeoma understood a simpler truth. The light had gone out. The shock of losing Daddy had blown it out like a fierce wind. To wake Mummy up, she needed to relight the flame. She needed to find the spark that made her incandescent. One afternoon, as Mama Tund dozed fitfully in the visitor's chair, Ifeoma stood on her chair, leaning over the bed rail. She stroked her mother's hair, so like her own. "Daddy made you shine, Mummy," she murmured, her breath fogging the metal rail. "He asked you on Valentine's, and you woke up so bright." She nodded to herself, a decision solidifying in her young heart. The logic was flawless in its childish purity. Valentine's Day was the day of the light. Therefore, Valentine's Day was the cure. The world outside the hospital room moved on. Tund was buried in his village in a ceremony Ifeoma was deemed too young to attend. The print shop was temporarily shuttered. The catering orders were canceled. But in room 314, time was suspended. Kimmy slept, and Ifeoma waited, tending to her mother with stories and drawings, her small heart meticulously crafting a plan, waiting for the calendar to turn to February, waiting for her one chance to bring the sun back into her mother's eyes. She was no longer just a daughter. She was a soldier of hope, guarding a silent queen in a sterile castle, convinced that love, in its right season, could perform miracles. The child's mission. The seasons turned outside the hospital window, a silent carousel of sun and rain that Ifeoma marked only by the clothes her grandmothers brought. The stifling heat of the rainy season gave way to the dusty, bright intensity of the harmattan. The air grew dry and carried a haze that turned the afternoon sun into a soft, orange coin. With the harmattan came December, and with December, a birthday. Ifioma turned 6 in room 314. There was no dodo-shaped cake, no party, no airplane rides on her father's shoulders. Mama Kimmy brought a small, store-bought sponge cake with a single pink candle. They sang a quiet, tear-choked rendition of Happy Birthday, the sound swallowed by the ever-present hum of the hospital. Ifioma blew out the candle. Her wish was the same as every prayer she'd whispered since her world fell silent. Let Mummy wake up. Instead, he saw a little girl. She was a small, solemn figure in a slightly faded dress, her enormous eyes peering up at him from a face that held a gravity far beyond her years. In her outstretched hands, she offered a bouquet of pink roses, their delicate petals a shocking burst of soft color against the sterile white and gray of the reception. "Uncle, please." Her voice was clear, a tiny bell cutting through the low adult murmur around them. "Be my mummy's Valentine." Chinidu's first reaction was a practiced, polished smile, the kind he gave to children who waved at his convoy or to junior staffers' kids at company events. It was a gesture of benign, distant acknowledgement. He was a man who lived in a world of boardrooms and billionaire deals. This was a charming, quaint distraction. "What's that, little one?" he asked, his voice kind but tinged with the impatience of a man with a schedule. He began to straighten up, already mentally moving past the encounter. But she persisted, taking a small step closer, the flowers still held out like a sacred offering. "Be my mummy's Valentine," she repeated, and this time, he heard the tremor beneath the clarity. "She is sleeping upstairs. She loves Valentine." "My daddy." He asked her on Valentine, and she was so happy. If she has a Valentine again, she will wake up. "Please." Something in the cadence of her plea, not a request for candy or a toy, but a plea for a medical miracle wrapped in the language of romance, made him pause. The smile faded from his lips. There was an earnestness here that bypassed the usual filters of his world. Driven by a curiosity he couldn't explain, he did something he rarely did. He lowered himself. He squatted, bringing himself eye level with her, his tailored suit stretching across his knees. At this proximity, the professional mask fell away completely. He saw everything. He saw the faint, salty tracks of dried tears on her cheeks, newly shed ones welling in her luminous eyes. He saw the way her lower lip quivered ever so slightly, held in brave check. He saw the desperate hope burning in her gaze, a hope so pure and fierce it was almost blinding. This was not a game. This was the entire world of a child, condensed into a single, impossible ask. "Your mummy is sleeping?" he asked gently, his voice softening into a register he hadn't used in years. Ifioma nodded, a quick, jerky movement. For a long time. Since my daddy went to heaven." The words were spoken with a heartbreaking matter-of-factness. He asked her on Valentine's Day, and she was so bright. "I need her to be bright again, so she can open her eyes." The story tumbled out in fragments. The proposal at the restaurant, the wedding, the sudden, catastrophic loss, the long sleep. She spoke of her mother's joy as if it were a tangible thing she could reproduce, a recipe she just needed the right ingredient for. And the ingredient, in her 6-year-old logic, was a Valentine. Chinita listened, truly listened. In his world, people spoke to him to gain something: approval, investment, favor. This child spoke to him to give something: a chance to save her mother. The simplicity of her faith was a gut punch. He looked at the roses, now slightly crumpled in her small, fierce grip. He thought of his own brother, sleeping off anesthesia in a private suite upstairs, surrounded by luxury and the best care money could buy. He thought of this girl's mother, lost in a coma no money had been able to break. The weight of his own power, usually felt as a burden of responsibility or a tool for strategy, suddenly felt different. Here was a problem no business acumen could solve. But perhaps, just perhaps, a different kind of gesture could. He reached out, not for the flowers, but to gently touch her hand holding them. Her skin was warm. "Okay," he said, the word leaving his lips before his pragmatic mind could veto it. "Okay, little one. What is your name?" "Ifioma," she whispered, a flicker of light breaking through the tears. "Okay, Ifioma," Chinidu said, making a decision that defied all logic. "I will be her Valentine." The proposition had been made and accepted. It was a contract signed not on paper, but on a wet cheek in a bed of pink rose petals, between a billionaire who had everything and a little girl who had nothing but a memory of light and a heart full of impossible hope. The Valentine's Project. The word okay, once spoken, became a binding covenant in Chinidu's mind. He was a man whose success was built on the principle that a promise made was a foundation laid. He had promised a child a Valentine for her comatose mother, and he would deliver an experience, not just a gesture. For the first time in decades, his formidable executive machinery was diverted from profit margins and market expansion to a mission of pure, whimsical heart. He escorted a bewildered but trusting Ifeoma back to her grandmother in the waiting area, introducing himself with a calm authority that instantly reassured Mama Kemi. "Madam, I have met your granddaughter. With your permission, I would like to do something for her mother this evening." A small Valentine surprise. He handed her his embossed business card, its weight and texture speaking volumes. Mama Kemi, too exhausted and desperate to question any thread of hope, could only nod, tears of confusion and faint gratitude in her eyes. Then, Chinita got to work. Standing in the hospital corridor, he made a series of calls that would have been at home in the planning of a corporate merger or a luxury product launch. First, he called his personal assistant. "Neoma, cancel my remaining appointments. Clear my evening. Then, I need you to find the best floral designer in Lagos. Not a shop, a designer. I want a room filled with roses. Red, pink, cream. Every variety. I want it to look like a garden fell from the sky. Deliver to the private neurology wing at St. Jude's by 6 p.m. Next, his event planner. Deji, I need a tasteful, live musical ensemble. A trumpeter, a guitarist, a talking drum. Something soft, melodic, but hopeful. They are to be at St. Jude's Hospital, Neurology Wing, by 6:30 p.m. Dress is formal, but demeanor is gentle. This is for a sick room." He then called the hospital's chief administrator, a man who recognized the Okonkwo name immediately. Within minutes, permissions were streamlined, and a discreet security detail was arranged to manage the unusual flow of people and flowers to the usually somber ward. Finally, he went shopping himself. Not to a mall, but to a high-end boutique where he selected a blanket of the softest cashmere, the color of Dove's wing. He bought a delicate, beautiful card and spent 20 minutes in his car, a pen poised over it. What did one write to a woman one had never met, in a situation so profoundly strange? In the end, he wrote simply, "For a brave mother, on behalf of a loving daughter. May this day bring light. A friend." By 6 p.m., room 314 and the corridor outside were utterly transformed. The clinical gray was swallowed by a profusion of blossoms. Roses stood in crystal vases on every surface, lined the floor in a fragrant path, and hung in small, tasteful arrangements from stands. The air, once stale with medicine, was now deliriously sweet. Nurses peeked in, their stern professionalism melted into wonder. Ifeoma watched it all unfold from her chair by the bed, her hands clasped under her chin. Her faith was being vindicated in ways beyond her wildest dreams. This was not just a man bringing a single flower. This was a production. This was the kind of magic she believed her mother's joy deserved. Chinidu arrived just as the three musicians were setting up quietly outside the door. He had changed into a simpler but still impeccably cut navy suit. In his arms were the cashmere blanket and a single, perfect, long-stemmed red rose. He looked at the transformed space, then at the small girl, her face alight with awe. "Is it right, Ifeoma?" he asked, suddenly unsure. The scale felt absurd, overwhelming. She nodded vigorously, her eyes shining. "It is perfect. She will see it when she opens her eyes." Chinita took a deep breath. The event felt like it had taken on a life of its own, swelling beyond a kind promise into something that felt eerily like a proposal. But it was too late to scale back. This was for her. For the memory of a light a little girl refused to let die. He gave a nod to the trumpeter. A clear, sweet, mournful note filled the corridor, softening into a gentle melody as the guitar and talking drum joined in. It was a familiar, tender high-life love song, its notes weaving through the scent of roses. Ifeoma looked between them, her joyous tears pausing in their tracks. She did not understand the history vibrating in the space between them, but she understood connection. She saw her mother's focus, sharp and alive, fixed on this stranger who had answered her call. He was not daddy, but he had made Mummy see. A nurse, recovering her professionalism, stepped forward to check vitals, breaking the spell. "Welcome back, Mrs. Adeyemi," she said gently, her voice thick with emotion. You've given us all quite a scare. Mrs. Adeyemi. The name was a splash of cold water. Kemi's free hand flew to her chest, to the empty space where a wedding band should have been. It had been removed for safekeeping. Memory, violent and unsparing, flooded in. Not the hazy memory of roses, but the searing, shattered memory of a phone cracking on a kitchen floor. Tunt. The crumpling darkness. A low moan escaped her, and she turned her head into the pillow, her body shuddering with the fresh, acute pain of remembrance. The awakening was not just to light, but to loss. Seeing this, Chinita moved. Still holding her hand, he spoke, his voice a firm anchor. Look at your daughter, Kemi. Look at Ifeoma. Kemi's tear-filled eyes found her child. Ifeoma was clutching her mother's other hand, her little face a canvas of worry and adoration. Mummy, you're awake, she sobbed, the words finally finding voice. You're really awake. The sight of her daughter, so grown, so steadfast, pulled Kemi back from the precipice of fresh grief. She was a mother. She had been asleep, but her child had been awake, fighting for her. She managed a weak, trembling squeeze of Ifeoma's hand. Her gaze then returned to Chinedu, 1,000 questions swirling in their depths. How? She began, her voice raw from disuse. She found me, Chinedu said simply, nodding toward Ifeoma. She had a mission, a Valentine's mission. She believed it would bring you back. He gave a small, incredulous shake of his head. She was right. He began to explain, keeping his words simple for Ifeoma's sake, but his eyes never leaving Kemi's. He told her about the hospital reception, the determined little girl with flowers, her heartbreaking proposition. He spoke of the perfume, the strange coincidence that had guided her to him. He did not mention the scale of his response, the transformed room. He let the sea of roses around them speak for itself. As he spoke, the past superimposed itself on the present. Chinedu, the brilliant, ambitious economics finalist at Nsukka, who had worshipped the ground the fiery literature sophomore Kemi walked on. Their love had been intense, intellectual, full of dreams of conquering the world together. Then came his scholarship to the London School of Economics, a distance that first stretched, then strained, then severed their connection. Life, relentless and busy, had swept them down different rivers. He had heard, years later through the brittle grapevine of alumni, that she had married, was doing well. He had tucked the memory of her into a quiet chamber of his heart, a sweet, finished story, and focused on building his empire. And now here she was, widowed, broken, brought back to life by the relentless love of a daughter he never knew she had, and by a scent that belonged to another man. The head nurse, after confirming Kemi was stable, shooed everyone but immediate family out to give her peace. Chinedu stood to leave, his part in this miracle seemingly over. But Kemi's hand tightened weakly around his. The gesture was instinctive, a grasp at a lifeline to this new, bewildering reality. Don't, she whispered. Not yet. Ifeoma, seeing this, added her own silent plea with wide, earnest eyes. Chinedu looked from the mother to the daughter, from the ghost of his past to the powerful, living spirit who had bridged the years between them. He nodded slowly. I'll be outside, he said. He turned and walked through the arch of roses, leaving mother and daughter to their tearful, whispered reunion. In the corridor, amidst the lingering musicians and the fading scent of the flowers, Chinedu Okonkwo leaned against the wall. The logical part of his brain tried to process the event as a bizarre, concluded act of charity. But his heart, a muscle he had long considered strictly metaphorical in matters of business, told him a different story. This was not an ending. It was an astonishing, fragile beginning. A little girl with a flower had not just awakened her mother. She had awakened a story everyone thought was finished, sending its characters crashing into a new, uncharted chapter. The past had been summoned, not to repeat itself, but to heal a wound it never knew it caused.